The dinner rush had finally eased, leaving only the hush of jazz and the faint clatter of silverware inside Elysium Hall, a restaurant where billionaires whispered deals between courses. Naomi Ellis moved between tables with the poise of someone who'd learned to survive on patience. The red apron couldn't hide the precision in her step or the sharpness in her eyes. "Table 9 wants another Bordeaux," her manager called. "And Mr. Cole's still here. Be careful, he's particular." Naomi didn't need the warning. Damian Cole, founder of Coletech and widower since the self-driving car crash that made national news, had been dining here almost every Tuesday. Always alone. Always lost in the glow of his phone. He had that quiet gravity of men who carried both fortune and grief. People stepped aside for him without knowing why. She approached the table with the bottle balanced neatly in her hand. "Would you like me to pour, sir?" He didn't look up. "Just leave it." Not rude, just final. A man who lived in conclusions. Naomi set the bottle down and turned away. Behind her, the phone on the white linen buzzed once, twice, then kept vibrating. She looked back. His chair was empty, jacket gone. On the screen, a contact name glowed in the dark. A. Cole Home. Her stomach tightened. Ava Cole, Damian's late wife. Every headline, every news clip came rushing back. The brilliant woman killed when the car she designed betrayed her. The phone kept humming, the sound small but relentless. No one else noticed. Naomi hesitated. Staff weren't allowed to touch a guest's belongings, but something in that name pinned her in place. She reached out, meaning only to mute the call. The phone stopped ringing. Then, without warning, a voice memo began to play. "If you're hearing this," a woman's voice said, soft, urgent, afraid. "They changed the route. Tell Damian." Static swallowed the rest. The screen flashed red. "File deleted. Truth Vault auto erase activated." Naomi's pulse leapt. She knew that app. Truth Vault, used by lawyers and whistleblowers. It wiped recordings the instant an unauthorized device accessed them. She whispered to the empty chair. "You were trying to tell him something, weren't you?" That's when a shadow fell over the table. Damian Cole stood there, eyes sharp. Every inch of him coiled control. "Who told you to touch that phone?" Naomi turned, still holding it. It was ringing. Then, it started deleting something. "You listened?" His tone could have frozen glass. "It sounded like your wife," she said quietly. For a long moment he said nothing. The restaurant's soft music seemed miles away. Then the muscle in his jaw flickered. "You think this is some kind of joke? I think she was trying to say something before she died." He stared at her, long enough for grief to surface beneath the anger. "What exactly did you hear?" "They changed the route, that's all. Then the app erased itself." Color drained from his face. His hand went to the chain beneath his shirt, where a wedding ring gleamed briefly. "She always left voice memos," he murmured. "Said truth was easier to speak than to type." Naomi hesitated. Maybe that truth didn't want to stay buried. He looked at her differently then. Not as a waitress, but as someone who might actually see the pattern behind the pain. "You didn't imagine that?" "No, auto-erase encryption doesn't hallucinate." A flicker, almost a smile. Then he pocketed the phone. "Come with me. I still have tables." He laid a black credit card on the linen. "You're off the clock." They crossed into the small, glass-walled lounge near the bar. City lights trembled through the windows, painting their reflections side by side. Damian poured himself water. "You studied law, didn't you?" Naomi froze. "How would you know?" "Because you speak like someone who's read too many contracts." He met her gaze. "Howard University. 3 years. Expelled after a scandal that wasn't yours." Her breath caught. No one here was supposed to know that story. If this is about hiring me, It's not, he said. It's about truth. I might need someone who refuses to blink. The words landed like an invitation and a warning all at once. Naomi studied him. The billionaire who'd built an empire out of code and loss. The man whose wife had died saying someone changed the route. "I'm not your investigator," she said. "I'm a waitress." "Not tonight." He lifted his phone again, screen dim, voice low. Truth Vault backs up recordings on paired devices. Her car's AI was one of them. If the backup still exists, it's proof. She frowned. "And you think I can help you find it?" He nodded once. "Because you already heard what everyone else tried to erase." They stopped at the doorway. The city pulsed beyond the glass, traffic like veins of light. For a heartbeat, their reflections overlapped, the powerful and the powerless, both chasing something that refused to die. Naomi's eyes fell on his wedding ring. Scratched, worn, but still catching every fragment of light. She didn't know why she whispered it, only that it felt right. If truth scares the powerful, maybe it's the kind worth sharing. Damian paused, almost as if he'd heard her, but said nothing. He opened the door. The sound of the city flooded in. Horns, footsteps, the low roar of midnight. Between grief and defiance, they walked out together. Neither of them knew that the moment would mark the start of everything they thought they'd lost. Justice, redemption, and the dangerous hope that both might still be possible. The ride to Coltech Tower was silent. Outside, Manhattan flickered like a living circuit, cars streaming beneath the glass as if electricity itself had learned to mimic traffic. Inside the limousine, Naomi sat opposite Damian, the air between them taut with unspoken questions. She'd been in the back seat of expensive cars before, but always as staff, never as a guest. The leather, the silence, the invisible rules, all of it felt wrong. Damian scrolled through his phone, eyes locked on the screen, expression unreadable. Finally, she said it. "So, are you going to tell me why your wife's voice just came out of your phone?" He didn't answer. The reflection of city lights danced over his face, half grief, half calculation. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "Because no one was supposed to hear it. Not even me." Naomi frowned. "Then why keep it?" "Because it's the only thing left that doesn't lie." The car stopped in front of a glass monolith, Coltech headquarters. Damian stepped out first, the cold night slicing through his composure. Naomi followed, staring up at the building that seemed to breathe light. Inside, an elevator whisked them to the 41st floor. The doors opened into a dim office overlooking the city. No one else was there, just rows of monitors and the faint hum of machines still running after hours. Damian placed his phone on a glass table. The screen lit up, unlocking automatically. "Truth Vault," he said, almost to himself. Ava built a personal variant of it, linked to her neural chip, synced with her car. Every memo she recorded was encrypted twice. Naomi blinked. "Your wife was an engineer?" He nodded. "The best I ever met, and the one person I couldn't protect." Something in his tone softened her guard. She stepped closer. "Then what did she mean by, 'they changed the route'?" Damian's gaze drifted to the skyline. "The night she died, her car went off the Hudson Bridge. Autopilot rerouted her path 5 minutes before the crash. The system said it was a weather adaptation, but the forecast was clear. He pressed a key. On the screen, a digital map unfolded, a glowing line tracing the final drive of Ava Cole. Naomi leaned in. "That's manual override. Someone interfered." "I know," he said. "But proving it means opening classified systems. Coltech's codebase is under government contract." Naomi turned to him. "So you're saying someone in your own company killed your wife?" He didn't deny it, The silence said enough. Then the intercom buzzed. A woman's voice crackled through. "Mr. Cole, security requests your presence downstairs. They say it's urgent." He frowned. "At this hour?" The voice hesitated. "They said it's about data breach protocol." Damian exchanged a look with Naomi. "Stay here," he ordered, then strode out. As soon as the elevator doors shut, Naomi's curiosity took over. She glanced at the glowing screen. One folder stood out. AVAC logs, restricted. The file names were timestamps, each one ending with the same tag. Route override. She clicked one. A soft beep echoed. Memo 17. Ava Cole. "They promised me this tech would save lives, but I think someone's using it to take them instead." Naomi froze. The memo ended abruptly, cut off mid-sentence. Footsteps. She turned. 2 men in security uniforms stood by the door. "Miss Ellis," one of them asked. "We need you to come with us." Naomi's pulse jumped. "Why? Company policy? You accessed restricted data." "I didn't." But they were already moving toward her. One reached for the laptop, the other for her arm. The elevator doors opened. Damian stood there, fury carved across his face. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped. The guards exchanged a look. "Sir, protocol. I gave her clearance," Damian cut in. "Get out." They hesitated, then retreated silently. The doors closed behind them. Naomi stood still, heart hammering. "I didn't mean to." "You shouldn't have," he said. But the anger wasn't aimed at her. It was self-directed. He sank into his chair, exhaling. "They're watching everything, even me." She frowned. "Who's they?" He didn't look up. "People who think truth is bad for business." Naomi crossed her arms. "Then you're not the only one they're watching." He glanced up sharply. "You think they'll come after you?" She smiled faintly. "I just heard the dead. That's usually bad luck." For a moment something flickered in his expression. Admiration, maybe. Then his phone buzzed again. This time the caller ID read, T. Caldwell. Damian's hand tightened around the device. "Trent Caldwell, my partner." He hit decline. Naomi watched him. "That's the man you think changed the route, isn't it?" He didn't answer. But his silence was confession enough. Damian stood, pacing. "He's been trying to buy me out since the accident, offering settlements, hushing investors, and now—" He stopped. His phone chimed again, this time with a new notification. Internal alert. Data access violation. User, N. Ellis. Naomi's blood ran cold. That's not real. I didn't—" Damian turned the screen toward her. Her name glowed in red. "You've been framed," he said quietly. "And they're using my wife's ghost to do it." The words hung in the air like smoke, soft, choking, real. Naomi's hands trembled. "Then what happens now?" Damian's eyes hardened. "Now we find out who killed her, before they bury you too." As the lights from the city shimmered on the glass walls, Naomi caught her reflection beside Damian's, fear and resolve merging into one. "Sometimes," she whispered, "the truth doesn't need permission to survive." He looked at her then, truly seeing her for the first time. Not a waitress, not an intruder, but the only person willing to face the storm. The night pressed close around Coltec Tower as Naomi followed Damian into the private lab section. Glass doors sealed behind them with a whisper, and suddenly, the world outside felt very far away. The room smelled faintly of ozone and steel. Screens covered the walls, a silent constellation of light. Damian swiped a keycard. "This is where Ava ran her prototypes. Everything you saw on that map came from here." Naomi glanced at a half-dismantled server rack. "And you think someone tampered with the data here?" "I don't think," he said. "I know." He tapped on the main terminal. The screen filled with encrypted logs, each tagged System Override Fundfortuarns Route Avasi. Naomi leaned over his shoulder, reading. Every override request is time-stamped, 5 minutes before the crash. Her eyes widened. But these entries came from an internal admin code, one only 2 people could access. Damian's jaw tightened. Me, and Trent Caldwell. The name hung between them like smoke. Naomi folded her arms. So you need proof, something that connects him to these overrides. He nodded. Ava hid her own backups. Somewhere in the system there's a folder called Truth Vault Shadow. It's not listed anywhere. Naomi tilted her head. Shadow, that sounds personal. It was her word for secrets, he murmured. Ones that could kill careers or save lives. Naomi sat down beside him. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, bypassing nested encryptions with practiced precision. You're good at this, he noted. Law school wasn't my only unfinished dream, she said dryly. My dad was an engineer, taught me code before I could drive. Within minutes, the terminal beeped. A hidden folder appeared. Truth Vault Shadow Ava C. Final Memo MP4. Damian froze. She left a message. He clicked. Ava's face appeared on the screen. Grainy, flickering, but unmistakably alive. Her voice soft yet resolute. If you're watching this, Damian, it means I was right. Someone inside Coltech changed the routes, not for safety, but for testing. Real people. Real lives. They wanted data, not justice. If Trent denies it, check the prototype ledger from Project Halo. The test car didn't fail. It was pulled offline, remotely. The video glitched, then ended. Naomi whispered, Project Halo. That's the AI autopilot program, isn't it? Damian nodded slowly. And it was Trent's department. They sat in silence, the glow of the monitor illuminating 2 faces, one filled with grief, the other with dawning resolve. Naomi finally said, Then that's your proof. Damian didn't answer. He walked toward the glass wall, staring down at the city lights. It's not enough. That video's timestamp is hours before the crash. He'll claim it's fabricated. Then you need the prototype ledger, she said. It's the one thing that can't be faked. His eyes met hers. It's stored on a private server at Caldwell Systems. Naomi's pulse quickened. So we break in? He gave a faint smile. I prefer the term retrieve evidence under duress. Before she could reply, a shrill alarm shattered the quiet. The lab lights flickered red. Unauthorized access detected, a synthetic voice announced. Naomi looked at the monitor, her own login ID flashing across the alert. Damian turned, his expression darkening. Naomi, that's not me, she protested. I didn't. He strode to the console, scanning the logs. Someone cloned your credentials. They're pulling everything from remote access. The terminal displayed a line of code. Data extraction initiated. Source, external node. Truth Vault Shadow. Naomi's heart raced. They're deleting Ava's file! Damian's hands flew across the keyboard, aborting the transfer. Too late. The folder blinked. Gone. A hollow silence followed. Only the red emergency light pulsed through the glass. Naomi's voice trembled. That video was your wife's last words, and now it's gone. Damian stared at the empty screen, muscles tight. They didn't just delete it. They wiped it from the server mirror, too. That takes clearance. My clearance. Naomi's eyes narrowed. So someone inside your company is still feeding them. He turned to her. I can't rule out anyone, not anymore. Something flickered in his gaze. Suspicion. She felt it hit like a slap. You think it's me? I don't know what to think, he said quietly. Every time you touch something, the system reacts. Her voice hardened. You brought me here. You gave me access. You asked for help. And since then, he countered, Every move I make turns into evidence against me. Their argument hung in the charged air. Naomi stepped back, crossing her arms. If you really think I'm working for them, say it. Damian hesitated. Too long. Right, she muttered. That's what I thought. She turned to leave, but his hand shot out, gripping her arm. Naomi, wait. If they framed you, walking out there alone will get you arrested before sunrise. She stared at his hand, then at his eyes. And if I stay, I get blamed for the next system failure. He released her slowly. Then we do it another way. You help me off the record. I'll clear your name. Naomi shook her head. You still think justice works like code, input, output, truth. But it doesn't. Not when people like Trent write the script. Her words hit harder than he expected. Before either could speak again, his phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. You want the truth, Damian? Come alone. 10 p.m. Pier 47. Damian read it aloud. Naomi frowned. That's bait. Maybe, he said, pocketing the phone. But if there's even a chance it's Ava's backup, I have to take it. Naomi stepped closer, her voice low. Then you're not going alone. Their eyes met, both aware that whatever awaited them at Pier 47 would either clear everything or destroy them both. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline, a storm gathering over the city that had buried too many secrets. As they left the lab, Naomi paused by the darkened monitor. For a brief moment, the reflection showed Ava's face, or maybe just her imagination. Some ghosts, Naomi whispered. Don't haunt. They guide. Damian didn't hear her, but the faint echo of those words lingered, following them into the storm. The storm broke just as they reached the waterfront. Pier 47 stretched into the black water like a spine of steel, half swallowed by fog. Rain sheeted down, stinging against Naomi's skin as she stepped out of the car beside Damian. Stay close, he said, slipping a small earpiece into her hand. If things go wrong... They already have, she replied. The sound of waves crashed against the pylons. Somewhere in the distance, a foghorn wailed. Long, mournful, almost human. They moved carefully along the pier, flashlights slicing through the mist. Cargo crates loomed like shadows of sleeping giants. Naomi's heart pounded. Every instinct told her this was a setup. But something stronger, curiosity, or perhaps the need for closure, kept her moving forward. Halfway down the pier, a lone figure stepped out from behind a container. Trent Caldwell. He wore a black coat that seemed to drink in the rain. His calm smile didn't reach his eyes. Damian, he greeted. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come. Damian's voice was cold steel. You sent the message. Trent spread his hands. Of course. You wanted the truth. I thought it was time we stopped hiding. Naomi watched from behind Damian's shoulder, tension coiling through her muscles. What do you want, Trent? Damian demanded. I want to show you something. Trent gestured toward a nearby cargo container. Its door stood slightly ajar, light leaking through the cracks. Damian hesitated, then stepped forward. Naomi followed, keeping her hand near the small pepper spray she'd pocketed earlier. Inside the container was a portable screen, humming faintly in the damp air. On it, a paused video feed showing Ava Cole sitting in a lab, alive, speaking to the camera. Naomi gasped. That's impossible! Damian froze. Where did you get this? Trent's voice was almost gentle. You of all people should recognize your wife's project logs. This one was hidden in a secure node. I just unlocked it. He pressed play. Day 214, Ava said on the screen. Her tone was weary but steady. Coltech's board approved the external testing without my consent. I warned them. The AI was unstable. But Trent insists it's ready. If something happens, this video is my record. Damian turned to Trent, fury boiling beneath his composure. You used her code for unauthorized trials. You killed her. Trent's smile didn't waver. Killed? No, Damian. She volunteered to prove you wrong. You said her model couldn't adapt to real-world chaos. She wanted to prove it could. She pushed the test herself. Naomi shook her head. That's a lie. Trent's eyes flicked toward her. And who are you, Miss Ellis? The waitress who thinks she's a lawyer? Be careful what you involve yourself in. You're trespassing on corporate property. Naomi met his gaze. You mean the property built on other people's graves? For a brief moment, something cold flickered in his expression. Idealists, he muttered, always so emotional. Damian stepped forward. Where's the rest of that footage? Gone, Trent said simply. But I have something better, a proposition. He pulled a sleek tablet from his coat pocket, the screen glowing with a legal document. Transfer of ownership, he said. You sign Coltech over to me, and I make sure no one ever sees Ava's classified files. Walk away, Damian. You'll keep your fortune and your freedom. Damian stared at the screen. And if I refuse? Trent's smile sharpened. Then I leak everything, including your wife's AI experiments that caused multiple malfunctions. You'll be painted as the negligent husband who let his wife die for profit. Naomi felt her stomach twist. This wasn't just manipulation. It was extortion layered with grief. Don't, she whispered to Damian. He's bluffing. But Trent wasn't bluffing. He opened another file on the tablet. Surveillance images, time-stamped from the Coltech servers, showing Damian in Ava's lab the night before the crash. Security footage, Trent said softly. Altered to suggest you tampered with her car's system. A perfect scandal. Unless, of course, you sign. The rain outside intensified, hammering against the steel walls. Damian's hands clenched. You planted this. Trent tilted his head. Maybe. But the world won't care. Truth doesn't sell, Damian. Stories do. Naomi's voice cut through the thunder. You're wrong. Stories reveal truth. Trent's calm shattered. And who's going to believe you, Waitress? You're already a suspect in a federal data breach. That was when Damian moved. Fast, one hand grabbing the tablet, the other shoving Trent back against the container wall. The device clattered to the floor. Lightning flashed, throwing the scene into stark white. For a heartbeat, Naomi saw Damian's face, raw, furious, breaking. Tell me the truth, he roared. Did you kill her? Trent smirked, even pinned. You really think I'd dirty my hands? Ava Cole is... He stopped. The smirk faded, replaced by something almost like fear. Naomi followed his gaze toward the far corner of the pier. Through the sheets of rain, a figure stood watching. A woman. Umbrella tilted low, face hidden, but the posture was unmistakable. Graceful. Familiar. Damian's voice cracked. Ava! The figure turned, and though the storm blurred her features, Naomi saw enough to know. This was no ghost, Trent whispered. She wasn't supposed to come back. Naomi's breath caught. She's alive. The woman dropped the umbrella. Lightning illuminated her face, pale, trembling, but real. Her voice carried across the pier, broken by wind. Damian, they lied to both of us. Before either could react, headlights cut through the fog from the far end of the pier, black SUVs speeding toward them. Trent's face twisted. You led them here! Damian turned to Naomi. Run! But it was too late. Armed men spilled from the vehicles, shouting orders, their boots slamming against the wet concrete. Naomi grabbed Damian's arm. We can't fight this! Then we don't, he said, pulling her toward a side ladder leading beneath the pier. As bullets shattered glass and thunder drowned the chaos, they vanished into the storm, leaving behind a pier littered with lies, and a woman they thought was dead, now walking toward her own unfinished truth. As they disappeared into the rain, Naomi looked back once, just long enough to see Ava standing in the lightning's glare. "Some truths," she whispered, "refuse to die, even when everyone else does." Rain blurred the city into streaks of silver and shadow. Naomi clung to the ladder beneath the pier, her breath ragged as waves crashed below. Damian followed, soaked, silent, and shaken. They ducked under the dock, half submerged, the noise of engines fading above. Only the sound of their breathing remained. "She's alive," Naomi whispered. "Ava's alive." Damian leaned against the wood, water dripping from his hair. His expression was unreadable, half disbelief, half guilt. "She can't be," he said hoarsely. "I saw the wreck. I buried her." Naomi looked up at him. "Then who was that?" Thunder rolled above them. Damian's jaw tightened. "We find out. But first, we get out of here." They followed a service tunnel running beneath the pier, emerging blocks away in an abandoned warehouse district. Inside, the shadows were thick, and the silence heavier than the storm outside. Damian dropped onto a broken crate, head in his hands. "If she's alive, everything I've done, all of this, wasn't for nothing," Naomi finished gently. She knelt beside him. "You were fighting for truth. You just didn't know whose truth it was." He looked at her then, something raw flickering behind his eyes. Before he could speak, his phone buzzed. A new message, unsigned. "Warehouse 12, 1 hour, come alone." Naomi read it over his shoulder. "Ava," Damian stood. "She wants me alone." "Which means you're not going alone," Naomi said firmly. Warehouse 12, 1 hour later. The storm had thinned to a fine mist. A single light burned in the vast, empty space, illuminating a woman sitting at an old workbench. Ava Cole. Her hair was shorter, streaked with silver. Her face, pale but alive, scarred near the temple. When she turned, her eyes carried both fire and exhaustion. Damian froze in the doorway. "Ava," she rose slowly. "You shouldn't have come." Naomi stayed near the entrance, every instinct alert. Damian's voice trembled. "They told me you were dead." "I was supposed to be," Ava said quietly. "That night the car didn't crash by accident. You were right. The route was changed. But the override wasn't to kill me. It was to erase me." Naomi stepped forward. "Erase you?" Ava's gaze flicked to her. "You're the one who answered his phone." Naomi hesitated. "Yes." Ava gave a faint smile. "Then you've already met my ghost." The air felt colder. Damian moved closer. "Tell me what happened, Ava." She looked down, voice trembling with a mixture of anger and grief. "The autopilot veered off course near the bridge. I lost control. Or so I thought. When I woke up, I was in a private facility. Coltech's experimental lab. Trent told me I was lucky to survive, and that the public believed I was dead." Naomi frowned. "They staged your death?" Ava nodded. "They said it was for my protection, that someone wanted me silenced. But after a few weeks I realized I wasn't being protected. I was being contained." Her voice cracked. "Every time I asked about you, Damian, they said you'd moved on, that you signed everything over to Trent, that I'd ruined your company." Damian shook his head. "They lied. I thought I'd lost you, that it was my fault." Ava's eyes glistened. "It was never your fault. But they made sure we both believed it." Naomi took a slow step forward. "How did you escape?" "I didn't," Ava said softly. "I was released when they thought I couldn't fight back. They erased my identity, scrubbed every trace of me from the system. But I remembered where I hid the backups. That's why I came tonight, to warn you both. Trent isn't working alone." Damian's eyes narrowed. "Then who is?" Ava hesitated, glancing toward the dark corner of the warehouse. "Someone higher. Someone who owns the technology, not just Coltech's code." But the patents behind it. Naomi frowned. You mean the government? Ava nodded. A division under the Department of Defense. They funded Project Halo's neural interface. When I tried to shut it down, they called it treason. Silence swallowed the room. Damian spoke first. That means if we expose Trent, we expose them. Ava met his eyes. That's why they let me live. As insurance. If I speak, they kill you. If you speak, they kill me. Naomi's voice trembled. Then what's the plan? Ava turned to her. The plan was simple. Until you appeared. You triggered the failsafe. Naomi blinked. Failsafe? Ava walked to the workbench, pressing a button beneath its edge. A screen flickered on, showing Naomi's face from restaurant CCTV footage, overlaid with the label, Observer 02, Authorized Access Restored. Damian stepped forward. What is this? Ava looked at Naomi. Tell me, did you ever wonder why his phone unlocked to your touch? Naomi froze. What are you talking about? Ava's voice lowered. Because the system recognized you. I designed Truth Vault's biometric failsafe to activate only for people connected to my neural map. You're not a random waitress, Naomi. You're the daughter of Daniel Ellis, my former chief engineer. Naomi's breath hitched. My father worked for Coltech? Ava nodded. He helped me build the original prototype. When he left, he wiped his name from the records to protect his family. You were a child then. He made sure no one would ever find out. Naomi staggered back, memories flashing. Nights of her father whispering about truths too dangerous to keep. Tears welled in her eyes. He died when I was 12. I thought it was an accident. Ava's tone softened. So did I, until I saw the reports. The same sabotage protocols used on my car were first tested on his. The revelation hit like a tidal wave. Naomi's world tilted. They killed him, and they used me to reopen his work. Damian turned to Ava, fury and confusion mingling. You used her too. Ava met his gaze without flinching. I didn't know who she was until now. The system recognized her. She's the last key to decrypting the Halo data. Naomi wiped her tears, her voice steadying. Then use me, but not for them. For justice. Damian looked between the two women, one who had come back from the dead, and one who had unknowingly inherited the ghosts of her past. For the first time, all three stood on the same side of truth. Fragile, fractured, but finally aligned. Ava reached out, touching Naomi's hand. Your father believed truth should belong to everyone. Help me finish what he started. Naomi nodded. Then let's end this. As lightning split the sky outside, the three figures stood together, soaked, scarred, and unbroken. Sometimes, Naomi whispered, the people who should have died are the ones keeping truth alive. The storm had calmed, but the city hadn't. From a distance, Manhattan shimmered under wet lights, a restless animal breathing in secrets. Inside the warehouse, the air was still thick with the weight of everything that had been said. Naomi sat at the old workstation, a flickering terminal before her. Lines of code scrolled like veins of light, mapping out the invisible heart of Truth Vault. Ava stood beside her, eyes fixed on the screen. Damian paced behind them, restless, unable to breathe through the silence. We're in, Naomi said finally, fingers flying. I've bypassed the security stack. The Halo core is still encrypted, but this is new. She pulled up a subfolder. Alvic Archive Koch Confession Code. Damian frowned. Confession? Ava inhaled sharply. That's not mine. Someone added it. Naomi clicked. The screen flooded with text, coordinates, dates, voice file references. At the bottom, voice auth required. Cole family signature. Damian stepped forward. That's my line. Be careful, Ava warned. If it's a trap, it could purge everything. He pressed his thumb to the sensor. The system scanned, beeped, and unlocked. A voice filled the room. Calm, confident, familiar. If you're hearing this, Damian, it means the inevitable has happened. Project Halo was never about navigation. It was about prediction, controlling human decisions before they're made. Naomi's blood ran cold. Who is that? Damian's face drained of color. That's my father. When you took over Cold Tech, you believed you were saving the company. But I built it for something larger. The military didn't fund us to create self-driving cars. They funded us to create self-thinking soldiers. Ava's eyes widened. Neural combat prototypes. I thought they canceled those. They didn't. The recording continued. They renamed it Halo. Ava was close to exposing the link. That couldn't happen. So we staged her death, transferred her consciousness data into the Halo mainframe. A copy of her mind, alive, contained, obedient. Naomi froze. A copy? Damian whispered, horrified. He uploaded her? If she ever resurfaces, the voice went on, use the failsafe embedded in her neural ID, the same one tied to your new assistant, Naomi Ellis. Naomi gasped. He planned this before we even met. The message kept playing, relentless. Naomi's father knew too much. He wanted to leak the prototype logs. We made it look like a car accident. Regrettable, but necessary. The sound of rain outside faded. Or maybe the world just stopped. Ava clutched the table, trembling. He killed Daniel Ellis. He killed me. Naomi's hands shook, tears streaming down her cheeks. And used both of us to clean up his mess. Damian stepped back, shaking his head as if he could physically push the words away. No, he died years ago. Ava turned to him, her voice breaking. Damian, when did your father die? He hesitated. 5 years ago. Stroke. They said it was sudden. Naomi looked up, her eyes fierce through the tears. That wasn't a death. That was a transfer. Ava's expression hardened. They didn't bury him, Damian. They digitized him. The computer screen flickered, as if reacting to their realization. The audio file glitched, and then the same voice returned. Only this time, it wasn't a recording. You're late, son. Damian spun toward the sound. The voice was coming through the system, echoing from the speakers. You were always sentimental. That's why you'll lose. Dad, Damian whispered, you've broken into restricted systems. You've compromised government property. You've chosen emotion over evolution. Ava stepped forward, fury in her tone. You turned human lives into code! And you're living proof that it worked, the voice said smoothly. Your memories, your thoughts, your fears, all patterns, the perfect algorithm of loyalty. Until now. Naomi slammed the keyboard. I'm shutting it down! You can't, the system responded, almost laughing. Your neural key is linked to the core. If you sever it, you die. Ava's hand flew to her temple, pain flashing across her face. He's inside the network. He's using me. My mind as a host. Damian rushed to her. Ava, fight it! She shook her head, voice strained. If he takes full control, he'll erase everything, including the backups. Naomi scanned the code frantically. There's a fail-safe buried deep, a manual shutdown, but it needs both of your signatures, biological and emotional verification. Ava gasped. He wrote that for us, for when the machine went rogue. Damian nodded grimly. Then let's end it. He placed his hand on the biometric pad. Do it, Naomi. Naomi looked at Ava, who nodded weakly, pressing her own hand to the second scanner. The screen flashed red, then white. Authorization confirmed, manual override engaged. The system screamed, a surge of digital static like a dying beast. Lights flickered, sparks showered from the terminals. Ava cried out, clutching her head. He's fighting it! Damian held her steady. Stay with me! You'll destroy everything, the voice thundered. Naomi shouted back. Then we destroy the lies too! With one final keystroke, the code collapsed. The room went dark. Silence. Only the sound of rain, steady, unrelenting. Then Ava exhaled, trembling. The lights flickered dimly back to life. "It's over," she whispered. Damian fell to his knees, shaking. "He was supposed to protect us." Naomi looked at him softly. "Sometimes protection means control, until someone decides to break it." Ava stood slowly, fragile but alive. "The system's dead, but the truth isn't. We still have the data mirror." Naomi nodded. "Then we show the world." Damian wiped his face, his voice barely audible. "He built an empire on control, but we'll rebuild it on truth." The rain outside turned to mist as dawn broke. Naomi stared at the faint reflection of Ava and Damian in the cracked monitor. 2 lives rewritten, 1 truth reborn. "The code tried to confess," she whispered, "but we were the ones who finally did." The night after the system went dark, the city looked wrong. Streetlights flickered like pulse monitors. Screens glowed but showed nothing. Somewhere in that silence, truth had finally screamed. And now everything else was whispering. Naomi sat alone in the warehouse where it had all ended. The servers were dead. The smell of burnt wires still hung in the air. She was exhausted, her hands trembling as if they still held the heat of the shutdown. Ava lay on a stretcher improvised from old cables, eyes half open. The implant in her head was silent for the first time in years. Damian hovered nearby, staring at the dark monitors as though his father's voice might rise again from the static. "Is it over?" Naomi asked quietly. "No," Damian replied. "Not yet. Killing the system doesn't kill the people who built it." Ava forced a smile. "But it kills their control?" Naomi moved closer, wrapping her jacket around Ava's shoulders. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Police, maybe, or the cleanup team from Coltech. "They'll come for us," Ava murmured. "I know," Damian said, "and this time they won't be hiding behind a screen." He looked at Naomi, his voice trembling between fury and grief. "My father, he believed he was creating progress, but he made monsters, and one of them is still alive inside that network. Parts of his code survived." Naomi frowned. "You mean he's still in there?" Damian nodded. "Ghosts of him, fragments. They'll try to rebuild. The board won't let 30 years of power disappear overnight." "So what do we do?" she asked. "We finish what he started," Damian said darkly, "but we do it right this time." Naomi stood up. "No, Damian, we don't fight monsters by becoming them." He turned to her sharply. "You think justice is clean? That the truth alone will fix this?" Her eyes glistened. "No, but if we lose our humanity chasing it, then we've already lost." The words hit harder than she meant them to. For a moment, his anger cracked, and behind it, sorrow poured out. At dawn, they left the warehouse through a side door, their footsteps echoing on wet concrete. The city was waking up, oblivious to the digital war that had just ended. Ava could barely walk. Damian supported her, while Naomi kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting the sky to light up with helicopters. They reached an abandoned subway entrance and followed the tunnel down to a safe house. It was damp, but it had electricity and an old radio. Naomi switched it on. A newscaster's voice filled the room. Unconfirmed reports suggest a massive data breach at Coltech Industries late last night. Officials claim it was a cyber attack, though sources inside the company describe internal sabotage. Damian laughed bitterly. Internal sabotage. That's what they'll call it. Naomi crossed her arms. Better than being called terrorists. The word hung between them. It was possible, even likely, that by sunrise their faces would be on every news feed. Ava coughed weakly. "Let them call us whatever they want. At least the truth is out." Damian shook his head. "Not yet. The confession files are gone with the main servers. Without physical proof, it's just our word against theirs." Naomi hesitated, then reached into her backpack. A small drive glimmered between her fingers. "Not all of it," she said softly. Damian stared. "You kept a copy?" "Of course I did," Naomi replied. "You think I'd walk away from all this with nothing?" For the first time that night, he smiled. A real smile. "You're dangerous, Naomi Ellis." "Only when I have to be," she said. That evening, rain began to fall again. Soft, cleansing, almost kind. Ava sat by the cracked window, staring at the city lights through the drizzle. "I used to think justice meant punishment," she said. "But maybe it's just the chance to live without fear." Naomi nodded. "Maybe that's what truth really buys. Not revenge, just the ability to breathe again." Damian stood by the doorway, watching them both. For the first time in years, his eyes looked uncertain, almost boyish. "What happens now?" Naomi asked. He exhaled slowly. "Now we decide whether to hand this drive to the authorities or to the people." Ava's voice was barely a whisper. "The authorities will bury it. The people will believe it." Naomi looked down at the small drive in her palm. It felt heavier than it should, like holding a heartbeat. She looked up. "Then we give it to the people." Damian's jaw tightened. "That's a death sentence." Naomi met his gaze. "Then it's one worth dying for." A silence fell, broken only by the rain. And in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. Trust, maybe love, or the kind of bond born only in fire. Near midnight, they prepared the upload. Naomi coded the encryption while Damian rerouted the network through ghost servers. Ava monitored the signal, her trembling hands steady for the first time in days. "Ready?" Naomi asked. Damian nodded. "Once we start, there's no going back." Naomi pressed the key. The data began to stream. Fragments of confession, images of experiments, recordings of voices long buried. The truth left their hands and entered the world. As the progress bar reached 100%, Ava smiled faintly. "We did it." Then the lights flickered. A low hum filled the room. On one of the monitors, a line of text appeared, typed by no one in the room. "You think truth makes you free? It only makes you visible." Damian froze. "It's him, the last echo of my father," Naomi whispered. "Then let him see us." She hit the final command. Delete route. Caldwell. The hum faded. The text vanished. And for the first time, the screen stayed black, completely, peacefully black. They sat in silence, listening to the rain. Outside, somewhere, the world began to wake up again. And somewhere inside that world, truth finally started to breathe. As Naomi leaned against the wall, exhaustion softening her face, she murmured, "If justice has a shadow, it's the part of us that still believes it's worth chasing." 3 days after the storm, the city looked almost normal again. The sunlight slid across the glass towers, as if nothing had happened. But for Naomi, nothing looked the same. She stood on the balcony of a quiet apartment overlooking the Hudson, watching the morning shimmer like a secret trying to breathe. On the small table beside her lay a single hard drive. Ava's handwriting was still visible on the label. Mirror copy, the real Halo. It wasn't just data anymore. It was proof. And the kind of proof that could destroy people. Ava appeared behind her, pale and trembling slightly. The neural scars at her temple pulsed faintly beneath the skin. "Coffee?" Naomi asked gently. Ava smiled. "Still trying to save me?" Naomi's voice softened. "Someone has to." For a moment the world was quiet. Just 2 women standing in the ruins of something that used to be impossible. "Where's Damian?" Ava finally asked. Naomi hesitated. "He left early. Said he had to finish something." The way she said it, like she already knew what it meant, made Ava close her eyes. He's not coming back, is he? Naomi didn't answer. She didn't have to. Hours later, Naomi watched the news from the small living room. Across every channel, headlines screamed the same truth. Coltech whistleblower exposes military AI scandal. Project Halo confirmed as human experimentation. The world finally knew. But even as anchors spoke Damian's name, Naomi's heart sank deeper. He was the one person missing from all those reports. The man who delivered the evidence and vanished right after. Ava leaned on the doorway, her voice fragile. He knew what he was doing. Once he gave them the data, he signed away his freedom. Naomi turned to her, tears threatening to fall. There has to be another way. Ava shook her head gently. They won't kill him, Naomi. They'll silence him. That's what systems do. They don't erase heroes. They bury them under paperwork. Naomi's hands trembled. Then I won't let them forget. Ava's eyes softened. You sound just like your father. Naomi smiled faintly through her grief. Maybe that's not a bad thing. She looked down at the hard drive again, small, silent, powerful. This can't stay hidden, she whispered. Ava stepped closer, her voice steady despite the weakness in her body. It won't. Because I've already hidden it, not in servers, but in people. Every truth needs a story, and every story needs a voice. Naomi stared at her, realizing what Ava meant. You want me to tell it? Ava nodded. Not as code, not as revenge. Tell it so people remember what happens when power forgets its soul. That evening, Naomi sat by the river. The city glowed in gold and glass around her, its reflection broken across the water. In her hand was a small recorder. Her voice, though tired, was clear. My name is Naomi Ellis. I was just a waitress, until I answered a phone that didn't belong to me. But maybe it did. Maybe it was always meant to. The wind carried her words like a prayer. They tried to erase people, to turn memory into code, love into data. But truth doesn't obey commands. She smiled softly, painfully. If you're hearing this, remember, justice doesn't come from power. It comes from those who refuse to forget. She set the recorder down beside her, the lights of the city rippling in its metal frame. The night felt endless, but for the first time, it didn't feel hopeless. A week later, in a small cafe in Harlem, the world kept moving. News screens flickered in the background. Anonymous video reveals truth behind Project Halo, 87 million views. The waitress behind the counter smiled as she refilled a cup of coffee. Her name tag read, Naomi. At the far corner, a man in a gray hoodie raised his cup in a silent toast. Damian. Alive. Changed. But alive. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The look between them carried everything: grief, gratitude, forgiveness. Sometimes the price of truth isn't death. It's learning to live with it. Outside, the city lights flickered like stars reborn. Naomi's quiet voice lingered in the background. If you still believe truth matters, share this story, because silence was their weapon. And now, it's ours to break.